Hello, my name is Hillary Weber, and I am the owner of Unleashed Pet Services, and I have here with me
Brenna Gray, the owner of Premier Animal Wellness and Surgery, also known as Paws.
All right, today we are talking about vaccination records. So one of the big things that I see a lot of, and I'm curious what you guys see too, is we get all kinds of different vaccination records from, and it can be from clinic to clinic, and it can be shelter records, it can be from a breeder. And the biggest thing that I always kind of have started actually trying to do is I use our records for Aries as an example from you guys. And I send an example of like what we're looking for. But for us, one of the big things with records is that we have to have due dates on there. So it can be like an invoice as long as it has due dates of when that vaccination is due.
Yep.
Because otherwise, if it just says like rabies and then it says given on 4/4 of 26, I don't know how long the rabies is good for. So, and it's the same thing with distemper, Bordetella,
Yep.
kennel cough, parvo. But then we also have a requirement of that it has to say the name of the clinic that provided those vaccinations. So then that way it shows what veterinarian might have provided it. Now I'm curious, is it when you get like new clients, what kind of requirements do you guys have for a veterinary clinic?
So luckily we're the ones that get to kind of review all the records and then say, hey, this is what your pet needs or this is what you're due for. So, I agree. I've seen all sorts of records in all different ways. New puppies are probably the most common one that kind of maybe have some wonky vaccine records, but also, I've even seen full medical records from other vet clinics that are on handwritten on
oh my goodness,
on index cards, and trying to read the upside down sideways notes gets a little confusing sometimes.
Oh my gosh.
So I think that we take what we get. For us, we unfortunately, whether I'm working up a sick pet, whether we have a new client that's in for vaccines, we don't take into account vaccinations given by owners very strongly in prevention of disease or when it goes to what your pet needs and vaccinating next. And the reason that is how are those vaccines handled? Okay. So, can you buy certain vaccines at farm stores and things like that? Yes, you absolutely can. But my example is, hey, the high schooler that works there as part-time job after school that was putting them away, did they take them out of the cooler and set them down and then look at their phone and text? Did they get distracted and go do something else and then come back and put them in the fridge? Handling vaccines are very effective. They're very safe. If they are not handled properly, they don't work like they should, though.
That makes sense.
So we always kind of say, okay, well, that's a home-given vaccine or a breeder-given vaccine. We just don't know. We just don't know if it was handled appropriately. And then kind of what they've been vaccinated for is another thing that we really look at. So, did they get a distemper vaccine with or without lepto? If the pet hasn't had lepto before, then it definitely needs to get a lepto vaccine. And kind of, there's an American Animal Hospital Association that puts out guidelines.
Okay.
And their guidelines they kind of give all of the when it should be boosted and things like that. But at the end of the day, it's when in doubt, vaccinate. We should make sure that they're covered.
So one question that goes into my brain, just as someone who's bought new puppies and gotten that record that you can tell, might have been administered at home. And so let's say I bring in this puppy and it has those vaccinations. Is there ever a time where you're like, ooh, I'm a little apprehensive and maybe we should just reboost her? Or is that just kind of the process then, is that you redo as if they hadn't received?
Yes, for the most part, yes. So all puppyhood vaccines need to be boosted every 2 to 4 weeks.
Okay.
To kind of make sure. I don't like to booster them sooner than a week, though.
Right.
So, sometimes we get puppies and the breeder gave the vaccine the day it left, which for many reasons I would advise not doing. But if we see that puppy, you know, in the next 2 days, we're not going to revaccinate it.
Right.
But, you know, we need to revaccinate every 2 to 4 weeks. I would probably have that puppy come in closer to that 2-week range versus saying, hey, let's wait till 4 weeks. Now,
Right.
if it was a vaccine that was administered by another vet clinic, I assume and hope that, you know, everybody's handling vaccines appropriately. And then we would say, hey, let's go closer to 3 to 4 weeks
Right.
versus no, we really need to see you sooner and make sure that we're getting the vaccines in.
So really, like, if someone were wanting to kind of breed or was a breeder of puppies, it'd almost be a safer way for vaccine handling to almost just have those puppies go
Yes.
to like a clinic, really.
Yep. And, and again, I'm not discluding that all breeders have bad vaccines. You know, I know breeders that get vaccines from reputable sources, handle them appropriately, but we get a lot of puppies from a lot of different areas, and unfortunately, we don't know every breeder. We don't know how they handled things.
Right.
So we kind of have to say,
Caution.
We need to be cautious. We need to be cautious.
And it's not even, like you said, it wouldn't necessarily always have to be that it's the breeder's handling or anything. It could have just been the way that it was shipped. Like, where did it come from? What was the handling of where they bought it from?
Yes.
And as much as we want to try and trust everywhere we buy things from,
Yes.
my brain always goes, well, there's certain brands out there that I would be a little apprehensive of how things were handled before it came.
Yes.
Without mentioning names, because, you know, that would probably be a bad idea.
Yeah.
But, you know, I totally could see that from that perspective too, that it's not always just that breeder may not necessarily handle it properly.
Correct.
But where did
it come from before that?
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. And then another thing that I think that's kind of pertinent to this conversation is for our clinic. So obviously if we get a new patient's records from a different clinic, we'll put all of their, we call them reminders, into our system so that we know when those vaccines are due. Where that gets a little tricky, and one thing we kind of say, we're not comfortable doing is, you know, if you call me and say, hey, I've got so-and-so coming in for boarding, I need their vaccine records. If I didn't give the vaccines, we don't like to send the records, and typically advise, hey, this is the clinic that gave the vaccines. Reach out to them, get the first-hand information, because we just have reminders, and it would be more accurate to have the first-hand data.
So now, what do you guys do with, like, because that just made me think of another question, was when, like, with shelters, sometimes we get records from some shelters that just say just the day the vaccinations were provided, but it doesn't say how long they're good for. So if you had received this new dog that had records like that, then would you say that they probably, like, let's say they came in and they were like, hey, here's these records from the shelter, can you put these into your system so that I can send them for boarding? Would you be able to transfer that into that information still for them? Or would you have to get them vaccinated? Do you get what I'm saying?
So in cases like that, so when they come in and there's no due dates on the records, we look through and say, so for example, all vaccines, the first time a pet has gotten it, needs to be boosted in 2 to 4 weeks.
Okay.
With the exception of like oral or intranasal Bordetella in an adult dog. That's one and done. We're good to go. It's good for a year. But we would review those records. If the dog had 2, say, distemper vaccines, and they have the given date on there, and that given date falls within that 2 to 4 week range, then we say, okay, that distemper is good for a year. If we only see 1 distemper vaccine on the records, we say, nope, we need to revaccinate.
Okay.
If it's been more than 4 weeks since that 1 distemper vaccine was given, then we say, hey, we need to do a 2 booster series. And again, that kind of falls back to the when in doubt, assume they didn't have anything.
Right.
Because we'd rather have the patient protected from disease than underprotected. So if I can look at a record and say, yep, distemper was given this day, within 4 weeks it was given again, we're golden. With things like rabies vaccines, again, a rabies vaccine is good for 1 or 3 years.
Right.
We always assume the lesser. If it doesn't explicitly say, we always assume the lesser.
That makes sense. So then, because like one of the things that we have to do is So even if we get those records and it doesn't say which length it is, when we've had inspectors come in, they tell us like we have to have those due dates on there.
Yep.
So I think it's just a little different expectations from different places.
Yes.
But it's really interesting to see the different perspectives and to put it all together in a way that might be helpful for everyone out there.
Yes.
For if they have any boarding coming up or grooming, and
Yes.
and even grooming has different requirements than what boarding might have.
Yes. Yep.
And so I mean, what do you guys run into anything with that, or is it a little bit different since you guys are a clinic too, that it can be like easier for you guys with vaccinations to help them out?
So yes, we're a clinic, so we can help out, but we do have quite a few grooming clients that come in with records somewhere else occasionally, and I think the biggest thing is there is what the state legally requires,
Right.
and then there is things that different grooming or boarding places require for the safety of your pet and for the safety of employees.
Yeah.
So for example, lepto is not a legally required vaccination for grooming.
Right.
It is a zoonotic, or people can get lepto, so it's one that we strongly encourage our grooming clients to have for the
Right.
safety of our employees. So that's one of them. I know there's different places that require like a fecal to make sure that while your patient's there or your pet is there, they're not contaminating the environment with intestinal parasites or flea and tick products. So I think that's the biggest thing is, there's the bare bones state requirements, and
Yep.
then there's kind of some things that are different places will suggest, recommend, or require to make sure that, hey, we're not sharing goofy things when pets come in.
Right. Well, and one of the things I kind of let people know when they come here too is, like kennel cough really isn't required for boarding.
Yes.
But we do require it
Yes.
because we want to make sure pets are safe when they come here
Yes.
and they stay here with us. And anything we can do to help make that environment, like health and infection control, are some of our biggest priorities, but also just making sure that they're protected. And like another thing that we sometimes have run into a couple of times, we've had some people come and they have like a veterinary written excuse almost for certain vaccinations because of allergies. And as much as I want to help those out, I still make that decision that I don't feel that it's safe. And as much as I would love to be able to, I wouldn't feel like it's a good idea. So we actually don't even accept written excuses for vaccinations. So everywhere that you go may have a little bit of different expectations when it comes to boarding.
Yep.
So those are really good things to kind of think about when you're planning to take your dog anywhere.
Yep. And I think, and I'm just going to interrupt, your kennel cough one is absolutely, like I would not personally take my dog boarding somewhere that didn't require kennel cough. And it's just like, it's herd immunity.
Yeah.
So your dog, it's helping all
Everybody
the other
else
dogs. I think that's amazing that you guys do require it. It's also something you require for grooming.
Yes.
Because it truly helps. So.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Now, do you see, because I know we don't have cat boarding here, but I always think about different things in the future. And now, what are requirements that you guys have for cats compared to dogs, and like what do you guys run into with those situations?
Yep. So for cats, cats are a little bit easier because they're not touching nose to nose. They stay, in their spaces and things like that.
Yeah.
But yes, vaccines are definitely required for any time a cat. They should be required anytime a cat goes boarding anywhere.
Right.
And usually that's going to be a rabies, distemper, and then the feline leukemia, especially depending on age for that. So.
That makes sense. That's always interesting to hear the different like areas that you run into with different, cats and dogs and everything.
Yes,
but
for sure.
Yeah, no, I feel like there's a lot of really helpful information out there with what we've talked about, and I think that it's definitely important to look into what your boarding facility might require for your next stay, especially as we get closer to summer, because I know for one, we are starting to see requests for summer quite a bit already.
Oh,
and
that's
so
amazing.
those are things to definitely start planning. I always tell everybody, when you're thinking about going somewhere, book your vacation and then book your pet's vacation next.
Yes, absolutely, Hillary, absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this week's Positive Talks. Whether you're a devoted dog lover, a curious cat parent, or somewhere in between, we're glad to be part of your journey. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and keep it positive.